Hey, yo, what's up? You guys are tuned in to CRE8 Force, where we create and dominate. That's Kai Billings. I'm Mike Sarge, and today we have a very special guest with us. We're excited to have her with us, and she's got some expertise that I think that you guys should really tune into. Please join us in welcoming Erica. Oh, I feel like I'm about to butcher your name, Erica Sansosti.
Yeah, nailed it.
Okay. Listen, we here to
Yeah.
welcome her to CRE8 Force. Erica, how are you?
Wonderful. It is a beautiful, stormy night in Florida, and I love thunderstorms.
I don't know how I'm with rain. I'm like in between. It's like in one moment I'm like, it's all right, and then another moment I realize that I just want to get under covers, watch TV with some snacks. So like
Yes.
thunderstorms,
Maybe
yeah,
that's what I like about the thunderstorms is like the curling up with a cozy book, and yeah, just kind of watching it storm. I love that.
for sure. No, thank you for joining us, and we're definitely excited to have you. For anyone that like who may not know who you are or what you're associated with, can you just share a little bit about yourself and what got you started on your journey?
Yeah. So, Erica Sansosti. I am currently the Air Force Technical Applications Center's organizational culture coordinator, formerly known as Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Program Manager. That's a new duty title for all of the DEIA professionals in the Air Force. I am also dual hatted in my wing or my center as the targeted recruiter. So that is recruiting for civilians. So we have a pretty cool mission set that we do there at AFTAC, and that requires us to kind of go out and be selective on who we hire and bring in because we're looking for some niche skill sets. And so I get to travel all over and go TDY and find us some of these unicorn scientists out in the world to bring back into to AFTAC. So I work directly with Kai, and we met when Kai was picked up for Level Up program, which is diversity and inclusion. And so I got to congratulate him on his application and being selected. And it just kind of our friendship grew from there. And then through Level Up is how y'all met. And then I met Mike through diversity and inclusion and sharing those passions. So um, we were kind of talking off screen about how did I end up here. My background is medical. My education is medical. Um, I say that my master's degree is just an MBA, right? So it's just business. And I was telling Mike kind of beforehand is, as a military spouse, when I was getting my degree, my associates, my bachelor's are medical, but with my master's, I kind of want to broaden my horizons because we never know where we're going to end up as military spouses. And so I didn't necessarily want to pigeonhole myself into medical if we PCS somewhere where I couldn't necessarily find a job. Um, but for 6 years prior to us getting here to Florida, we were stationed at Spangdahlem, Germany. Um, we were there for 7 years. I worked in the medical group for 6 of those years, 3 as a contractor and 3 as a federal civilian. And my work there, I was a physical evaluation board liaison officer, otherwise known as a PEBLO, otherwise known as the medical evaluation board program manager, the MEB program. And so for those that are not familiar, the Medboard program is the program that medically separates or retires active duty service members who can no longer stay in the military due to a medical condition. And so my job as the PEBLO was to literally walk people through that program, both in partnership with the VA, their primary care providers, their commanders, etc., to process them for separation or retirement. And I did that with over 250 cases in Germany. And that doesn't include the ones that we retained. That is just the ones that we either separated or retired. Super passionate about the program. I've been out of the job for 4 years now. Still super passionate about the program. I could talk about it probably for hours, even though at this point my experience is probably getting a little bit more outdated. Um, Depending, post COVID, I was in Germany middle of COVID, and so some of the programs were starting to change then. um, and things have kind of modified a little bit since I left, but my overall knowledge is still pretty. I was reading up on the regulations and AFIs before I dialed in just to make sure my info wasn't too outdated. And most of it is still similar enough that I can talk about it for the most part. um, yeah. So that's how I got into federal service. And then that program is very the Medboard program can be very difficult for military members to navigate, and can be an isolating experience. And so I dealt a lot with people who had been, excluded from their organizations, and stripped of their AFSC or stripped of their career, and sent to a different office to operate while they were going through this process, which can take 6 to 12 months. um, and so in doing that, I developed this passion for advocating for those who may not have a voice for themselves. And so when I first moved back to the States, I kind of continued that work. I was a medical case manager at an HIV clinic, and at a nonprofit organization here in Florida. And so my work in Germany led me to this work. And that's where I started my first journey with the diversity inclusion certification. And it was shortly after that that the diversity inclusion job posted here at AFTAC. And I was like, perfect, just got my certification. This sounds like a gem. Um, and I was the first diversity and inclusion program manager hired in ACC, first full-time civilian hired. And so I've been doing the job almost 3 years exactly. And so it has changed a little bit in duty titles and primary functions, but the overall work is what it is. It is still giving a voice to the voiceless and giving, understanding to leadership on how they can advocate and better take care of their people.
Hmm. No,
So,
that's awesome. And thank you for sharing that. Um, so I want to start with like just the informing piece first, especially on the medical side, with your experience with med boards. From your purview, what are some myths just surrounding them, or what are things that people just really don't know about them? I can just speak as a supervisor. Normally, like when you hear med board, sometimes like in our brains, for whatever reason, it just clicks that, oh snap, this person's getting out, they're
yeah.
done, and that's one that comes to my mind. Like that's not exactly what that means. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to get kicked out. So like from your experience, what are some myths about the medboard process or what happens within it that people should know about?
Yes, that's a good one. That's a good question. I used to do annual training every single year with the first sergeants, and be like, hey, if you have a person that PCS is in, and they're like, I've been med boarded 8 times and returned to duty, they're not telling you the truth. Um,
Mm,
so there's a few. So typically, a lot of people who aren't in medical call an, the entire medical process that is encompassed in this as a med board, and that's not exactly correct. So something that's unique to the Air Force is what's called an IRILO. It's an initial review in lieu of a med board. It's not an actual med board. It's essentially a pre-screener. And so what it is it's like a mini package that gets put together, and it includes what's called a narrative summary, which is a summary of your medical information from your PCM. It has a commander's impact statement, which is a letter from your commander saying basically this is how this person is performing at work. It includes any specialist notes that you need, any providers you've been seeing off base, etc., that go along with that condition, and then a copy of your 469, your profile. And so those things go together and they get reviewed locally at your MTF by a board. It's now called the AMRO, Airman Medical Readiness Optimization Board. It used to be called the DAWG, DAWG, Deployment Availability Working Group. And so it gets reviewed kind of locally at that board, and they review all of the components, and they make a local recommendation on whether or not they think that you should be returned to duty or full med boarded. And then what happens is that package gets sent out from the PEBLO to AFPC. It's AFMOA is the organization, as long as it's still called that. And they review it to make the ultimate determination on whether or not that person should be returned to duty or full med boarded. And so you may have situations where the provider is like, they're good to go. They can do all duties of their AFSC. Profile supports that. Commander says, love this person, want to keep them. And AFPC says, sorry, gotta go. And those are hard because it kind of blindsides a lot of people. Sometimes, depending on the medical condition, it doesn't matter what everybody is going to say. it's going to result in a med board, because whatever that condition is just not compatible with military service, especially if it's going to impede on your ability to do your job in a deployed setting.
Mm.
And some people are like, well, my job is not deployable. If World War III were to pop off, you might not be doing your duties as a 3F5. You might have a completely different, mission set if the proverbial crap hits the fan. So, if you can't put on your Kevlar vest and run 100 yards away from a blast, regardless as to what your AFSC is, you might not be able to stay in the military. Sometimes it might be medication dependent. You might be completely stable on a medication, but if that medication can't be deployed downrange, you can't get it downrange, that could also be a problem. And so that is some of the myths that you kind of run into. But in that iRILO phase, if you get returned to duty at that point, that's not going through a full med board. That's going through a pre-screener. And so typically what will happen is AFPC will return you to duty, either completely free and clear, you're good to go, or they'll return you to duty with what's called an ALC code, an assignment limitation code. And Kai's shaking his head like, yep, I've heard about this. So it's usually like a C1, C2, C3, and each one of those are a different, they have different regulations as to what level would prevent you from PCSing, deploying, etc. And C3 is the most restrictive. We didn't see a whole lot of C3s in Germany. Usually that was like a very uncontrolled case, potentially leading to a med board. And if we saw those, it was usually, instead of reviewing those annually in conjunction with your PHA, you'd review it. They'd give you a deadline, like in 3 months, we want to see this person back. And if they're not doing better, then they could potentially trigger a med board at that point. So if you get iRILO'd and fully return to duty, usually your profile is removed, or your mobility restrictions might come off, duty restrictions might come off, and you go to more of a less restrictive profile. But if they return you to duty with one of the C codes, then you might keep a profile with that ALC restriction on there. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're being med boarded. Typically, you get reviewed annually in conjunction with your PHA. So we used to see that a lot with sleep apnea. Once upon a time, we used to iRILO everybody with sleep apnea if they had an AHI, apnea hypopnea index, over 15. That was considered a deployment restriction. And same thing with food allergies. They used to automatically iRILO all food allergies, but they returned to duty, most of them. All the ones that I saw, and I can't say that definitively, right? Because there's going to be, onesie twosies out there that were like, I got med boarded completely out for sleep apnea. And I was like, well, 250 cases, I never saw it, but I believe you. And so, I'm sure they exist out there, but for the most part, we would return all of those to duty. And so when people say I've been med boarded 8 times, what they probably have done is been iRILO'd, returned to duty, and then reviewed annually after that. So yeah, that's probably the most common myth that's out there, is people call everything a med board when it's actually probably an iRILO, an initial review, and then an annual RILO, an annual review after that. During my time as a PEBLO, and my statistics could be a little outdated here, if AFPC reviewed your iRILO and it came back saying that you needed to be put through the IDES process, the Integrated Disability Evaluation System, aka the med board, your chances of returning to duty were less than 2%. So 1.93% is what I saw. So I'm a data person. I like the numbers. Now, when I say that 2%, that's without any appeals, and that's without fighting it. There are some process, at the end of the process, there's a couple of appeals options that you have that if you fight it with an attorney that's free, then your chances go up. The better command support you had, your chances go up. The more that you can prove that your body is actually able, your chances go up. So the 1.93% is if you do nothing, you're probably getting processed for separation and retirement.
Wow.
So that's the most common myth that I would see.
No, thank you for sharing that. I feel like there are gonna be many people that hear that and you're gonna have bug eyes, like, wait, hold on, I had no idea that any of this is going on or happening. Or
Mm-hmm.
we've heard people say, I've been medboarded 7, 8, times, not realizing that it's just the review. That is very interesting. Like, thank you for sharing that. Has there ever been like a case that surprised you within like a medboard process? Like, is there been, like, everyone has like a story about something. I was wondering if you had like a something that caught you
Yeah.
off guard.
So to go back to the myths conversation, okay, so
Mm-hmm.
this is another one that people don't know. If you get medboarded and I'm processing you for separation or retirement, what determines separation or retirement is your disability percentage. So we're going to use a bad knee for an example. If your knee rates less than 30% disability per the VA disability guidelines, then you get medically separated. If your knee condition is 30% or higher, you get medically retired. Now, here's where that myth comes in. If people hear medical retirement, they think retirement. Not the case. If you serve a day shy of 20 years of service, you do not get your Air Force retirement paycheck. A day shy.
Mm.
So what you do get is TRICARE benefits, right? Healthcare is
Right,
expensive.
right,
TRICARE is
right.
not bad. But a lot of people would think, oh, I'm getting retired, I get retirement pay. There are some stipulations to that, some asterisks that you'll add. There's combat related specialty compensation. There's a few outliers there that could warrant you to get money from the Air Force. But for the most part, if you serve a day shy of 20 years, you don't get retirement pay. So, one of the most shocking cases that I ever saw, I went through the whole Medboard process with the gentleman. Results came back 7 days before he hit 20 years in service, and they were going to discharge him with a severance package. Now, if you didn't get retirement, you got separated. That separation was a severance package. So you got 2 times your base pay times how many years you've been in the military. So they were going to, at 19 years and 11 months, they were going to offer him a check and say, have a good life. 7 days before he hit retirement.
Oof.
So, fortunately for him, he exhausted his first appeal option, which was the formal board appeal. 7 days later, he said, just kidding, I don't want to appeal anymore. They cut his retirement orders and he went on about his day. But 7 days early, and he was almost out of luck.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So I think that was probably one of the most shocking cases that I ever, like one of the most shocking results that I ever got. But I worked a ton of heartbreaking cases, and that was probably the ones that will linger with me for a long time. I had 3 active duty personnel die within 3 months of cancer, back to back, young. I did. Have either of you ever been stationed overseas? Well, I know, Mike, you were just in Hawaii, but so one of the other, outside of the official Medboard process, but still in my realm of duties, was when you had a military member who had a medical condition that you couldn't necessarily treat in country, or who was terminal or severe enough and they didn't have the support that they needed, like family in Germany. One of my duties was to do what's called oh my gosh, it's an AMTU, Airman Medical Transition Unit. It's essentially a medical PCS. And when that happens, we send you, especially if it was in like a terminal situation, we send you back to the city and state that you wish to return to, not a base. We send you home. And so in that situation, you're tied to a base that's close by, but it may not necessarily be close to an installation at all. That installation will own you, and they'll be responsible for your referrals or your medical needs. But you're not necessarily expected to return to duty anywhere. Your job is to be a patient. It's often referred to, or used to be referred to, as a patient squadron. And so those can exist at an MTF anywhere, but we use them a lot in Germany, unfortunately, because we had quite a few severe diagnoses and quite a few cancer back-to-back patients, which was really, really tough, and very tough to process and very daunting. Spangdahlem had a pretty dark cloud over it for about a year. Um, we lost 3 to cancer. We had a car accident that killed 2. We had 2 airmen overdose and die in their dorms. I mean, it just was a really, really rough year. And all of those, when they're active duty, would be processed through my office. So I was also responsible for all of the autopsies and getting those processed through Dover. So even though that, a lot of times the Medboard process can be a good thing, people, especially if they knew that they couldn't remain active duty, getting all of their VA stuff taken care of for them on their way out the door was a blessing in disguise. But some of the ones that stick with you are the ones that were the darker cases.
Interesting. But that definitely, interesting enough, it definitely explains like your passion, your passion for advocating for others. Like it definitely explains that. Like something I was gonna ask, is was there a pivotal like moment for you, like whether it's your career or your life, that like significantly, um, like shaped your views on leadership or even like inclusion or anything in that vein?
I loved the Medboard process and being able to advocate for others, but I think where I really became like super advocate, super advocate, super passionate, was when I dealt with really terrible commanders. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if I encountered a couple of commanders in my time, one of them was a medical squadron commander who had a person in medical that was getting med boarded, who the commander didn't feel earned or deserved the results of the med board that person got. They were medically retired and had been in the military less than a year, but they were med boarded out for mental health reasons. And I'll never forget, this was very early on in my job as being a Pueblo. That commander said to that patient, that mental health person, mental health patient, I hope you get out of the military and make something of yourself, because you sure didn't deserve this. And I will never forget that, like, visceral response, and how pissed off it made me. It was like being a mama bear, like, coming out. And I think that was so early on in my career, that it changed the way that I advocated for my patients. And it was almost always commanders that I encountered that just really did not have their people's backs through that medical process. Um, I dealt with a security forces commander that was pretty terrible on how he treated his people. So at the end of a medboard process, when you get your results back, um, you get a data separation, and it comes fast. The thing about the medboard process is it takes a while, but in the beginning, it's like briefing, 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 nothing. Briefing, 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 nothing. And then you're sitting and waiting on your results, and then you get them back, and it's like, oh, go time. Like, you have 30 days without processing, permissive TDY, terminal leave, done. So you know it's coming, but when that end time comes, it comes really fast, and you don't usually have a ton of time to prepare. And so one thing that commanders had the ability to authorize was permissive TDY leave. And overseas, it was up to 30 days. And I don't think that has changed. State said it was 20, overseas it was 30. And I had a security forces commander who would not grant 30 days of leave unless they had served like 20 years in the military. And I used to fight this same commander every time. And I was like, you know what? When that airman re-enlisted for the last time, he raised his hand for a significant amount of time, 6 years, 4 years, etc. And now he's on borrowed time, but he doesn't even know how much borrowed time. He just knows that it is coming up, and when it comes fast. And that 30 days to you might look like free leave, but that 30 days to that airman is time to get back to the States and find a house, find a job. You have to think this was pre skill bridge time. not technically. Technically, SkillBridge has been around for a while, but it was not widely used like it is now. So you're talking 30 days of leave for this airman to PCS from Oconus back to the States, get set up, find a house, get established, and potentially 30 extra days of a paycheck to get their life reset up for life on the outside when they weren't necessarily prepared for their life to come to an abrupt end in the military. And so that commander and I used to go back and forth nonstop. And so I started building the 30 days into their leave, and they would make him deny it on the back end. So I would build it into the orders and then make him go back and be the bad guy. I used to ask for permission first, and then I would go back, and then I would fight the fight after the fact, and I would escalate it up if necessary. And one of the best commanders in the medical world that I ever encountered is, and if there is any medical people that listen to this, they will absolutely have my back, is now Brigadier General Alfred K. Flowers Jr. And if you've, Kai knows, if you, I encourage you, Mike, if you've never heard the name, look up the family. There's Alfred K. Flowers Jr. and there is Alfred K. Flowers Sr. And Al Flowers Sr. holds the record for the longest time served in the Air Force. Came in a slick sleeve and retired as a major general. Served 46 years in the military. And his son was my med group commander in Germany while I was there. And the best family you'll ever encounter, but also Al Flowers Jr., my commander, was just the best leader I ever worked for in my time in medical. And I would follow that man into a burning building to this day. And so he had to have my back a lot in the Medboard process, because even though I was a liaison and I was an advocate, I was also the face. And so if somebody didn't want their Medboard to happen, they often took it out on me. So I had one person in particular who filed 3 congressionals and 2 IG complaints against me. Now, mind you, I was just the paper person. I didn't make any decision. I was there to help them. But they were trying to buy time in their career and hit 20 years, which I got it. But in the meantime, they trashed my name. Colonel Flowers at the time, General Flowers now, he fought the good fight with me and would help clear my name through the whole process. And that person ended up getting to 20 years and they retired and, thanked me in their retirement speech. But in the meantime, it was hell. And if it wasn't for the good commanders like General Flowers, it would have made that process a lot more difficult for me.
Wow. No, for sure. Kai?
That's a lot. That is just a lot to deal with. But one thing you mentioned is just how isolating it might feel when you don't know how much time you have. And one thing that makes me think of is, like, especially for military spouses who don't know how long they're going to be in one spot. How have you dealt with not only escaping your niche that was medical, but going from that to a nonprofit to the nuclear enterprise doing what you do? What words might you have for spouses out there who are just trying to, like, keep their head on their shoulders as they deal with this crazy life?
It's tough. I mean, you get it, Kai. I mean, your wife is a military spouse as well, and navigating this world as a military spouse is one of the hardest things that you'll go through as a spouse. Outside of the military world, they don't always get it. It's picking up and moving your life every X amount of years is tough. Starting over is tough. Especially when you're a federal civilian. They talk about a lot about like military spouse preference. If you've ever heard that term, meaning when you PCS, you're supposed to have priority in hiring. Especially as a federal civilian, you should be a higher priority to be hired in the organization. And that was not my experience coming here. Right after I got here, there was a position open in medical that I qualified for perfectly. It wasn't the Peplo job, but it was another job that had opened up, and I fell into the good old boy system situation where that job was pretty much handpicked for somebody else, even though I should have been the one to qualify for it. And I fought it and I argued about it. And my husband was a shirt in the mid group also. So I didn't want to burn any bridges for him. But it's tough as a spouse to start over. And so I applied for any job and every job that I even remotely sounded qualified for just to get back into federal service. Um, you know, First Lady Jill Biden has done a lot of advocating for military spouses and trying to get, more out there, but we could always do better for our spouses, and getting them into work. But one thing is, stay vigilant. How I got my foot in the door was volunteering. Um, I started out in the med group in Germany as a Red Cross volunteer. Um, but I will say, like, I benefited from having friends that I had been stationed with in Utah that were stationed with us in Germany. And she knew of a contract position that was opening up. And so it was word of mouth. But I started out as a volunteer, which is also another way that a lot of spouses got their foot in the door in the med group in Germany. So,
No, that's good. That's good. And no, you're right. I think that honestly, we don't show enough love to the spouses out there when it comes to, as you said it, essentially picking up your life and leaving. Um, new area, new stresses, looking for new friends. I feel like that's underrated that no one really
Mm-hmm.
talks about, because you've got a routine that you're going through, like maybe your spouse comes home, maybe you have kids, maybe you have dogs, whatever it is, and all of that is getting changed within like months. And so we definitely want to show some love to anyone in that position that's a male spouse. We love you guys. Thank you for the support. You guys are the reason why a lot of us are able to do what we do every single day. So we definitely want to show some love to them.